Okay, let's talk about visualization in blockr. As ever, we're going to start with some data on penguins, where we have different species on different islands, and we can look at different attributes. So, to get started with visualization, let's right click, hit append block, and then type in ggplot. So, this ggplot block is the go to block for visualization. The reason it's called ggplot is it is built off of the ggplot2 package in R, which is a method to create data visualizations. And that method basically is to build up a visualization layer by layer. So we start with an empty grid, we can then add our axes, we can then add points and colors and themes. And that's the approach taken here in blockr. These layers are called mappings. But let's start first by selecting a chart type. So let's start with a density plot, as it's nice and simple. The way we build our plots is we supply the mappings and then blockr will render the plots in real time. So for density plot, we only have one required mapping. So this asterisk signifies required fields. So let's pick something to plot. Let's plot bill length on the x-axis. So we select our mapping and then blockr automatically renders our plot. Now, outside of our required mappings, we also have extra mappings we can apply. So here for density plot, we have this fill by option. And what this will do is allow us to provide a second column in our data. So here, let's pick species, and then it will fill the density distributions in different colors by the species. Okay. Let's say that instead of our density plot, we wanted to visualize this data instead as a histogram. In our chart type selector, we can just click histogram. And what happens is blockr automatically ports over the selections from the previous chart type. So it knew that the density plot selected species for fill by, a bill length for the x-axis, and it carries these over. This feature now allows us to click between chart types and quickly see how the different visualizations look. Let's toggle this off to none. And now let's go to scatter to add in a secondary axis and see a slightly more complicated plot. So again, it's carried over our mapping from the histogram, but this time it's rendered the plot blank or gray. And the reason for this is all of our required mappings are not populated. So here we can see that the y-axis also has this red asterisk. So let's pick a secondary axis. Here, let's look at how bill length correlates with bill depth. So we can click bill depth, and now we have our required mappings populated. The plot will automatically render. Like before, let's add some color. So let's color by species to see how the different species vary in these correlations. And we populate our box and the plot automatically updates. We could also add as many mappings as we like. So we could also size by a different variable. So here we could size by body mass. And again, a new mapping is added onto this plot. Here we can see body mass is by the size of the circle, and that allows us to see the relationship between body mass, bill length, bill depth, and species all on the same plot. In many of the different chart types, there's this advanced section, so you can click on show advanced options. And in here, we can add even more mappings. So let's toggle off maybe the size by. So we could add shapes. So we could do the same thing. We could look at body mass by shape, although that won't make much sense because we'd have 100 shapes. Let's instead pick sex, a dichotomous variable. So we can now see we have two different shapes for the two different sexes. Likewise, we could also use alpha, which will change the transparency of some of the points. So let's do body mass by alpha. And here we can see the points get shaded different levels of transparency by body mass. Okay, let's say we're happy with our species plot. The next thing you might want to do is also see how our species vary by island. But let's say that we didn't want to attribute islands to one of the other mappings, but instead wanted a different plot for each of the islands. To do that, we can use something called a facet block. So we're going to right click, append block, type in facet, hit append. And now what we can do is facet by and select a column in our data. So let's say we facet by island. What's going to happen now is this plot is now going to split up by island. So we can now see we've split into the Biscoe, Dream, and Torgerson islands by species. And now we can see some new trends emerging in the data. So for example, we can see that the Adelaide penguins appear on all of the islands, whereas the Gentoo and Chinstrap only appear on individual islands. Instead of having this row layout, as we can see here, we can instead choose a column layout. So we can select, we only want one column. And if we do that, it will then automatically adjust the layout or the grid to match our configuration. This becomes really helpful if we had, say, 10 plots. We could then rearrange them how we see fit. We could have 5x2, 2x5. The combinations could be endless. Okay, let's go back to auto. The next important part of the faceting is the scales. So by default, all the scales are the same. So we can see the x-axis goes from 0 to 60 for each of the 3 individual facets. But let's say we wanted each of these to have their own scales. We could click free X, and now we see that the scales for each of these change depending on the points in the data. We could do the same for the Y. So the Y-axis could change. So now each plot has its own individual X and Y coordinates. However, it's probably most sensible to keep them fixed most of the time because we want to be able to compare between facets. Okay, now we've created our faceted plot. The next thing we might want to do is add some theming on top. So we also have a theme plot. So we can right click, append block, search for theme, and we'll see there's this theme also from ggplot. Let's append the theme block. And what the theme block allows us to do is change the fonts, the point colors, the background colors, etc. Automatically, the theme is inherited from upstream, i.e. higher in the workflow, but we can override this. So in the first drop-down box, we can change the base theme, which will control all of these aspects at once. So black and white is quite popular. And this nicely allows us now to see there's actually 3 separate plots going on, one for each island. And there's also many other themes provided by default. So there's even some fancy themes like the Wall Street Journal. But for now, let's just stick with our black and white theme, which nicely highlights these 3 separate facets. We can also change the position of our legend. So we can move it to the left or the bottom. But again, for now, we're just going to keep the default, which is the right. And likewise, we can change the color of the points. So here, for the color palette, we have some scales from something called Viridis, which is a scientific scaling package, which is colorblind friendly. So let's pick Viridis categorical because we're working with categorical data. And now we have these nicely colored points. We can click on the Advanced Options tab and we can have even more control over our theme. So let's say we like our black and white, but we want larger text size. We can change that here. And let's say we wanted to remove these small minor grid lines on our plot. We could do that here. We could hide minor grid lines. And finally, let's say we wanted to add some color to our plot. The panel background will change all the color in the panels. The plot background will change all of the color in this plot area. And the grid color will change the color of these grid lines. So let's say we want to make our grid lines slightly darker. First thing we do is pick a color. So let's pick this black color, and then we put the transparency up to where we want, and we'll see the plot automatically updates. Let's also say we want to add a panel background color. Let's pick some kind of light gray color. Again, we pick our color and then slide the transparency value on. And now we've created our own custom theme. Okay, great. The last feature to show in visualizations is we can combine many visualizations into one view. So to do that, let's add a second block. Let's append another visualization. So click ggplot. Here, let's just create a simple distribution plot of species looking at their bill length. So we now have our scatter plot and our distribution plot. Let's say we wanted to visualize these both in the same view. To do that, we click on any one of the plots, right click, append block, and then in ggplot we also have this grid block. And what grid allows us to do is combine multiple plots into a grid. So let's append the grid block. And currently there's only one input going into the grid, as we can see by this number 1. So it only plots the single plot. However, if we get another plot object and drag it into the grid, it will then give us the possibility to arrange these in a single view. So to do that, we can hold Shift, click on our plot we want to drag in, click and drag into the grid, and now it automatically inserts this as an input into the grid. And again, like we had for the facets, we can control the layout. So we can say actually we want 1 column, not 2, and it will rearrange them. But for now, let's just leave it in auto. We can add titles to our visualization. So we could have a title, a subtitle, a caption, and it'll add all of these elements to our plot. We can also add tags, so we want to reference these later. So now we have our I and 2I. And finally, we can also collect our legends. So if we have multiple legends like we do here, we can have them all collected together. Again, personal choice and preference, but for now, let's leave it in auto. So collectively, all of these different visualization blocks allow you to create some powerful visualizations.